I never thought the end of my life as a father would begin with the sound of a hand striking my face. It was a quiet morning. Too quiet for a house that had once been filled with laughter, arguments, and the soft hum of a woman moving from room to room. Martha had been gone for 93 days. I knew the number because I counted them. Each morning, I still reached across the bed for her, my hand landing on cold, untouched sheets. Each morning, I still brewed 2 cups of coffee before remembering that only one would be drunk. Grief has a weight to it. People don't talk about that. They speak of sadness, of tears, of loneliness. But grief presses down on your chest until breathing feels like work. It slows your movements, dulls your thoughts, and stretches time into something unbearable. But none of that prepared me for what happened next. Fred's hand came out of nowhere. The crack echoed in the kitchen, sharp and final, like something breaking that could never be repaired. My head snapped to the side, and for a moment I saw nothing but white. When my vision cleared, I found myself staring at the man who had once been my little boy. "Either you wash my car and work as a gardener," Fred said coldly, "or you go live on the street." I blinked, my cheek burning, trying to understand how we had gotten here. How the boy who used to cling to my leg when he was afraid of thunder had become the man standing in front of me now, his face twisted not with concern, not with grief, but with irritation. "You're pathetic, old man," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "Mum's been dead for 3 months, and you're still moping around like some lost puppy." Lost puppy. 42 years of marriage reduced to that. "I'm grieving, son," I managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Your mother was my everything." Fred rolled his eyes as if I had said something inconvenient rather than heartbreaking. "Yeah, well, life goes on," he snapped. "And since you're living in my house now, eating my food, you're going to start earning your keep." His house. The words hit harder than the slap. This had been Martha's and mine for 38 years. We had painted every wall together, argued over the color of the kitchen cabinets, planted every rose bush by hand. I could still remember Martha laughing as we tried to fix the loose floorboard in the hallway. Both of us convinced we knew what we were doing. But when she got sick, everything changed. The medical bills came first, slow at the beginning, then all at once. Savings disappeared, retirement funds were drained, and then Fred stepped in, not as a son offering comfort, but as a man offering a solution. "Sign the house over to me," he had said back then. "It'll protect it from creditors. It's just paperwork, Dad. You can still live here like nothing's changed." We trusted him. God help me. We trusted him. Now, standing in that same kitchen, I realized just how foolish that trust had been. "What do you mean?" I asked, though something deep inside me already knew. Fred walked to the window and pointed toward the driveway, where his black BMW gleamed under the morning sun. "See that car?" he said. "It needs washing every week. The lawn needs mowing. The garden needs weeding. The gutters need cleaning. You want to stay here. You work for it." Something inside my chest cracked then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like ice breaking beneath the surface of a frozen lake. "Fred," I said slowly, "I'm your father." "And I'm the one paying the bills now," he shot back. "Mum left you with nothing. I'm not running a charity. You either contribute, or you find somewhere else to go. And at your age, with no money?" He shrugged. "Good luck." The next morning I found myself on my hands and knees in the driveway. The concrete scraped against my skin as I scrubbed the chrome of Fred's BMW with an old toothbrush. My back ached from bending over, my knees throbbed, and my fingers trembled from the cold water and cheap soap. I tried not to think about how I had once stood in that very spot, teaching Fred how to ride a bicycle. He had been so small then, his legs barely reaching the pedals, his voice full of fear and excitement. "Don't let go, Dad!" he had shouted. "I've got you," I had promised. And I had, until now. "You missed a spot," Fred called from the porch, sipping his coffee like a man watching hired help. "And when you're done, the grass needs cutting. I've got friends coming over tonight, and this place better look perfect." I nodded without looking up. What else could I do? Neighbors passed by as they went about their morning routines. Some slowed down, their eyes lingering on me with a kind of uncomfortable pity. Mrs. Henderson from next door paused at her gate, her expression tight with concern. She and Martha had shared coffee every Tuesday morning for 20 years. Now she saw me like this. I turned my head away. I couldn't bear it. The yard work took 6 hours. By the time I finished mowing, trimming, and clearing the gutters, my hands were blistered, my clothes soaked with sweat, and every muscle in my body trembled with exhaustion. I stumbled inside, hoping, just for a moment, that maybe Fred would see how hard I had worked, that maybe, somewhere deep down, the boy I had raised would remember who I was. Instead, I walked into laughter. Fred sat at the kitchen table with 3 of his friends, beer bottles in hand, their voices loud and careless. "Hey, guys," Fred said with a grin, gesturing toward me. "Meet my live-in gardener." They burst into laughter. I stood there, dirty, aching, humiliated, while men young enough to be my sons looked at me like I was something amusing. "Dad," Fred added casually, "grab us some beers from the fridge, would you?" For a moment I didn't move, not out of defiance, but because I didn't recognize myself anymore. Was this what I had become? A servant in my own home, a man who took orders from the child he had once carried on his shoulders. "Man," one of Fred's friends said, shaking his head, "I can't believe your old man actually does all this for you. My dad would tell me to go to hell." Fred shrugged, taking a long drink. "What can I say?" he replied. "He knows which side his bread is buttered on." That night, I lay in the small guest room Fred had assigned me. It had once been his nursery. I could still see the faint outline on the wall where we had hung his mobile, little airplanes spinning gently in the air. Martha and I had spent countless nights in that room, taking turns holding him when he was sick, whispering lullabies into the darkness. Now it was where I slept, alone. The ceiling stared back at me as I replayed the day over and over again. The slap, the orders, the laughter, the slow erosion of something inside me that I had always taken for granted. My dignity. Days turned into weeks. Each morning brought a new list of chores: wash the car, clean the pool, trim the hedges, scrub the floors. No matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. "There are still water spots," Fred would say, inspecting the car. "Do it again." "I can still see leaves in the pool. What exactly do I pay you for?" He didn't pay me anything. My payment was a roof over my head, and whatever leftovers remained after he had eaten. But the worst part wasn't the labor. It wasn't the exhaustion. It was what it did to me. Every day I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller, quieter, less human, like a piece of furniture that existed only to serve a purpose. 3 weeks into this nightmare, I was trimming the front hedge when I heard a familiar voice. "Alan!" I turned to see Mrs. Henderson standing at the fence, her face lined with concern. "Honey, what's going on?" she asked softly. Martha would be heartbroken if she saw this. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. "I'm fine," I said finally. It was a lie, and she knew it. She reached through the fence and touched my arm gently. "No, you're not," she said. "This isn't right, and you know it." Her eyes searched mine, and then she asked the question that changed everything. "Martha left you that insurance money, didn't she? About 25,000. I nodded slowly. "Fred said I needed to give it to him," I admitted, "to help with expenses. He said the house was too much for him to manage alone." Mrs. Henderson's expression darkened. "Alan," she said firmly, "this house has been paid off for 10 years. Martha told me herself." For a moment the world went silent. "Anfern!" The hedge clippers slipped from my hands and hit the ground with a dull thud. 10 years! No mortgage, no financial burden, which meant Fred had lied. He had taken the last thing Martha had left for me. The money she wanted me to live on, to survive on, and used it for himself. And still, it wasn't enough for him. That evening, as I stood in the kitchen serving Fred his dinner like a waiter in my own home, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, something colder, something that whispered a truth I had been avoiding for weeks. I couldn't live like this anymore. Not as a father, not as a man, not even as a shadow of who I used to be. And for the first time since Martha died, I began to think about leaving. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the darkness of the room that had once belonged to my son, staring at the ceiling where faint outlines of old memories still clung like ghosts. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that presses in on you, reminding you that something is deeply, painfully wrong. Mrs. Henderson's words echoed in my mind. This house has been paid off for 10 years. 10 years. Fred hadn't just taken my money. He had taken my trust, twisted it, and used it to justify everything that followed. I thought about Martha then, about the way she used to look at Fred with that quiet pride, the way she would defend him even when he made mistakes, always believing he would grow into a good man. What would she say if she saw him now? Or worse, What would she say if she saw me, on my knees in the driveway, silent, obedient, broken? Something shifted inside me, not suddenly, not dramatically, but like a door opening just enough to let in a thin line of light. I couldn't stay. Not like this. Not here. Or the next morning. I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I ignored Fred. Not openly, not defiantly, just quietly. Instead of waiting for his list of chores, I sat at the kitchen table with an old newspaper Mrs. Henderson had slipped into my hands the day before. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned the pages, not from age, but from something else. Fear, perhaps. Or hope. I wasn't sure which. Most of the listings blurred together. Part-time cashier, warehouse assistant, delivery driver, all jobs meant for younger men with stronger backs and faster reflexes. Men who hadn't spent the last 3 months being slowly dismantled. Then I saw it. A small ad, barely noticeable, tucked between offers for used furniture and pet grooming services. Live-in caregiver needed for elderly gentlemen. 12-hour shifts, room and board included. Experience preferred, but not required. Serious inquiries only. I stared at those words longer than I should have. A stranger's house, a stranger's life, and yet, somehow, it felt safer than the one I was living in. Before I could change my mind, I picked up the phone. My hand hesitated over the numbers. This was it. The first step away from everything I had known. The first step toward admitting that my own son had driven me out. I dialed anyway. Whitmore Residence. This is Margaret speaking. Her voice was crisp, efficient, not unkind, but not warm either. I'm calling about the caregiver position, I said, trying to steady my voice. How old are you? There was no hesitation in her question. 66. A pause. Most applicants are younger, she said. I understand, I replied, but I'm capable. I learn quickly, and I cared for my wife during her illness. Another pause. Longer this time. Do you have experience with Parkinson's disease? My heart sank. No, I admitted, but I'm willing to learn. Silence. Then, can you start immediately? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I said quickly. Too quickly. Be here tomorrow at 8 in the morning. 1527 Elmidge Drive. Don't be late. The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to my ear. It was happening, for better or worse. It was happening. The next morning, I stood in front of a house that didn't look real. It rose behind a wrought iron gate, tall and imposing, its white columns gleaming in the early sunlight. The lawn was perfectly manicured, every blade of grass standing in quiet obedience. The garden was trimmed with surgical precision. It made Fred's yard, my yard, look like something neglected. I adjusted my shirt, suddenly aware of every wrinkle. It was the best one I had left. Margaret opened the door before I could knock twice. She was exactly as her voice had suggested, mid-50s, sharp features, steel-grey hair pulled tightly into a bun. Her eyes assessed me in a single glance, taking in everything from my worn shoes to my stiff posture. Mr. Matthews? Yes, ma'am. She stepped aside. "Follow me." The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not empty, but controlled. Every piece of furniture was in its place. Every painting aligned perfectly. There was no warmth here, only order. We stopped in front of a heavy oak door. Margaret turned to me. "Mr. Whitmore is inside. I'll be direct. He's had 3 caregivers in the past 6 months. 2 quit. 1 was fired." I swallowed. "He can be difficult," she continued, "but he's not cruel. The position pays $800 a week. Cash, room and board included. Sundays off, unless there's an emergency." $800. The number echoed in my mind. It was more money than I had seen in years. More than enough to rebuild something. "Understood," I said quietly. She nodded, then knocked once and opened the door without waiting. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Alan Matthews." The man in the wheelchair was not what I expected. He looked older, yes. Fragile, certainly. His hands trembled with the unmistakable rhythm of Parkinson's, but his eyes were sharp, clear, alive. "You're old," he said bluntly. "Yes, sir," I replied. He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing something unseen. "Most men your age are retired," he said, "playing golf, spoiling grandchildren." "I suppose so." "Then why are you here?" The question hit harder than I expected. Because how do you explain that your own son reduced you to this? How do you say out loud that you would rather care for a stranger than live under your own child's roof? "I need the work," I said finally. He didn't look convinced. "Margaret," he said without taking his eyes off me, "leave us." The door closed behind her. Silence settled between us. Then he wheeled himself closer. "I've been rich my entire life, Mr. Matthews," he said calmly. "I can smell desperation, and I can smell lies." His gaze sharpened. "You reek of both." I looked down at my hands. The cuts, the calluses, the faint scars from weeks of labor that had meant nothing. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Why are you here?" For a moment I considered lying. It would have been easier, safer, but something about the way he looked at me, like he expected honesty, not performance, made that impossible. "My wife died 3 months ago," I said quietly. His expression didn't change. "My son convinced me to sign over my house during her illness. Said it was to protect it from creditors." I paused. "When she died, everything changed. He treats me like hired help now. I wash his car. I clean his house. He took the money she left me." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. "What's his name?" Whitmore asked. "Fred." He repeated it slowly. "Fred." Then he leaned back slightly. "And you'd rather leave everything you know to take care of a sick old man than stand up to your own son." The truth stung. "I tried," I said. "He reminded me I have nowhere else to go." Whitmore was quiet for a long time. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke again. "I have 3 children," he said. 2 sons, 1 daughter. He turned slightly toward the window. "Do you know the last time any of them visited me?" I said nothing. "My daughter called 6 months ago. Needed money. My oldest son came last Christmas. Stayed 20 minutes. Asked about my will." His voice grew colder. My youngest hasn't spoken to me in 2 years. He looked back at me. People think money solves everything, he said. It doesn't. It just makes you a target. Something shifted between us in that moment. Not sympathy, not pity, recognition. The job is yours, he said simply. I blinked. Just like that. I don't need someone perfect, he replied. I need someone honest. He studied me once more. And you look like a man who's run out of reasons to lie. I didn't know what to say. Margaret will show you your room, he added. We start Monday. As I followed her down the hallway, something unfamiliar settled in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Hope. That evening I returned to Fred's house. He was in the living room, watching television, the glow of the screen flickering across his face. "Where have you been?" he snapped without looking at me. "The pool needs cleaning." "I won't be doing that anymore," I said quietly. He turned then, slowly. "What did you say?" "I found a job," I continued. "Live-in caregiver. I'm leaving tomorrow." For a moment he just stared at me. Then his face darkened. "You ungrateful old man," he spat. "After everything I've done for you." "Hire someone," I interrupted. The words surprised even me. "You have the insurance money." His eyes narrowed. "That was payment for room and board." "The house is paid off," I said. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. "Martha told Mrs. Henderson," I added. For the first time. Fred hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. "Fine," he snapped. "Go play nursemaid. But don't come crawling back when it doesn't work out." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply went to my room and packed. Not much to take. Just clothes. A few personal items. And the suitcase Martha and I had used on our honeymoon 43 years ago. As I closed it, I looked around the room one last time. So many memories. None of them mine anymore. The next morning, a taxi waited in the driveway. Fred stood at the window, watching. I didn't wave. There was nothing left to say. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. For the first time in months, I was leaving not just a house, but a life that had already ended. The first morning at the Whitmore residence began with silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence I had grown used to in Fred's house, but a structured one. A quiet that felt deliberate, almost respectful, as if the walls themselves understood the value of stillness. I woke before dawn, out of habit more than necessity. For months I had trained my body to rise early, to begin the endless list of chores before Fred even stepped out of bed. But here, there was no list waiting for me. No voice barking orders from another room. Only a neatly typed schedule resting on the small desk beside my bed. Breakfast, 7:30 a.m. Medication, 8 a.m. Reading time, morning financial papers. Lunch, 12:30 p.m. Everything had a place. Everything had a time. For a man whose life had been reduced to chaos and humiliation. There was something strangely comforting about that. I moved carefully through the kitchen, following the instructions Margaret had given me the night before. Coffee first, exactly as written. But I made a mistake. Of course I did. When I brought the cup into Howard's study, he took one sip and frowned. "Too hot," he said simply. I froze, expecting the familiar sting of criticism that would follow. Fred would have laughed. Fred would have insulted me. Fred would have made me feel small. Instead, Howard set the cup down calmly. "The coffee needs to be about 170 degrees, he explained. "Any hotter, it burns my tongue. Any cooler, it tastes like dishwater." He looked at his trembling hands. "I can't check it myself anymore," he added, "so I need you to get it right." There was no anger in his voice, no mockery, just expectation. "I understand," I said, "and I meant it." That was the first difference I noticed. "Howard didn't humiliate," he corrected. The days that followed were filled with small mistakes. I folded the newspaper the wrong way. I brought lunch 5 minutes late. I miscounted his medication once and had to double-check the bottle 3 times before handing it to him. Each time I braced myself. Each time he responded the same way. Calm, precise, fair. "You'll get it," he would say. And slowly, I did. Something shifted in me during those early weeks. At first, I worked out of fear, then habit, but gradually, something else replaced it. Respect, not just for him, but for myself. I began to take pride in the details. The exact temperature of the coffee, the crisp fold of the morning paper, the quiet efficiency of moving through the day without disruption. It had been so long since anything I did mattered. Here, it did, and Howard noticed. "That's better," he said one morning after taking a sip of his coffee. "You're learning." It was such a small thing, such a simple acknowledgement, and yet it stayed with me all day, because no one had said anything like that to me in months, not since Martha. The hardest part wasn't the schedule, it wasn't the precision, it was watching him struggle. There are some things in life you assume will always be simple. Buttoning a shirt, holding a fork, lifting a cup of coffee. For Howard, none of those things were guaranteed anymore. I watched him one morning as he tried to fasten the top button of his shirt. His hands trembled violently, refusing to cooperate with the task. Minutes passed, then more. 15 minutes, just to complete something. Most people never think about. Finally, I stepped forward. "May I?" I asked gently. He hesitated, then nodded. As I worked the button through the hole, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pity, something deeper, understanding, because I knew what it felt like to lose control over your own life. "This damn disease," he muttered under his breath. 40 years building companies, and now I can't even dress myself. I finished the last button and stepped back. "My wife used to say something," I said quietly. He glanced at me. "She said our bodies might fail us, but our minds and our hearts are stronger than we think." He was silent for a moment. Then, "Your wife sounds like a wise woman." She was. The word felt heavier than it should have. We didn't speak for a while after that, but something had changed. That afternoon, he asked me to stay in the room while he read the newspaper. Not because he needed help, just because. That was how it began. The conversations, at first, they were brief. "Practical? Did you see this?" he would ask, pointing to an article. "What do you think about it?" Simple questions, but questions no one had asked me in a long time. "What do you think? Not what do you do? Not what do you owe? Not what do you serve? What do you think?" I had almost forgotten how to answer. I think, I began one morning, hesitating slightly. I think people make decisions based on fear more than logic. He looked at me, interested. Explain. And I did, slowly at first, then more confidently. Because he'd listened, really listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, not dismissing my words, just listening. Over the weeks, those conversations grew longer, deeper. He told me about his past, not in the way rich men brag about their success, but in the way old men remember what it cost them. I started with nothing, he said one morning. My father died when I was 16, left my mother with 4 kids and debt. He stared out the window as he spoke. I worked construction during the day, night school in the evenings, 8 years just to get a degree. What was your first business? I asked. Construction supplies, he said. I saw a problem. Contractors couldn't get materials fast enough, so I fixed it. He smiled faintly. Same-day delivery, within 50 miles. It nearly killed me. But it worked. I could hear the pride in his voice, not arrogance. Something earned. You built something real, I said. I did, he replied. And then I sold it, started again. He listed them one by one. Real estate, manufacturing, technology. Each time building, each time growing. Each time believing it would mean something to the people he loved. I thought I was building a future for my children, he said finally. His voice changed then, hardened. Turns out, I was just building something for them to spend. I didn't respond right away, because I understood more than I wanted to. One evening, about a month into my time there, I found him in his study. He wasn't reading. He wasn't working. He was crying, not quietly, not discreetly, but openly. His shoulders shook as tears streamed down his face. For a moment, I stood frozen in the doorway. I had never seen him like this. Mr. Whitmore, I said carefully, are you in pain? He shook his head. Richard called, he said, his voice breaking. I stepped closer. What happened? He wants money, he said bitterly. Another business idea, another chance to waste what I built. He laughed, short, hollow. When I said no, he called me selfish. The word hung in the air. Selfish. I pulled a chair beside him and sat down. I'm sorry, I said. 43 years old, Howard continued. Never held a real job. Never built anything. And I'm the selfish one. He turned to look at me. You have a son, he said. Fred? I nodded slowly. He's not much different, is he? The truth sat between us. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. No, I admitted. I suppose he isn't. Howard leaned back in his chair. The difference, he said quietly, is mine were spoiled. He gestured vaguely. Money, comfort, no consequences. Then he looked at me again. Yours should have known better. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Had Fred always been like this? Or had something changed? Had grief twisted him into something unrecognizable? Or had it simply revealed what was already there? That night I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling once again. But this time, it wasn't the same. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't afraid. I was thinking, really thinking, for the first time in months, about choices, about dignity, about what it meant to be treated like a human being. And somewhere in those thoughts, A realization began to take shape. Sometimes the people who share your blood are not the ones who see you, and sometimes a stranger can recognize your worth faster than your own family ever could. By the time 6 weeks had passed, the line between employers and employee had begun to blur. Not suddenly, not in any dramatic, spoken way, but in the quiet spaces between routine, between the morning coffee and the evening news, between the measured ticking of the clock and the soft rustle of pages turning in the study. Something deeper had taken root, something neither of us had expected, something neither of us had asked for. Friendship. It revealed itself in small moments. Howard no longer waited for me to leave the room after delivering his breakfast. Instead, he would gesture vaguely toward the chair across from him. "Sit," he would say. "You might as well learn something useful while you're here." At first I hesitated. Old habits are hard to break. Fred had taught me that my place was always standing, waiting, serving, silent. But Howard expected me to sit, to speak, to exist. So I did, and slowly, those mornings became something I began to look forward to. We talked about everything: politics, economics, the news of the day, but also life. "Do you know what the biggest mistake I made was?" Howard asked one morning, staring into his coffee as if the answer might be hidden there. I shook my head. "I thought success would buy loyalty," he said. "That if I gave my children everything, they would give something back." He let out a quiet breath. I was wrong. I didn't respond immediately, because I knew that feeling. In a different way, I thought love would be enough, I said finally. He glanced at me. "For Fred?" I nodded. "Martha and I gave him everything we could. Not money, not like you, but time, attention, values. Or at least we tried." "And yet," Howard said softly. "And yet," I repeated. We sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward, not heavy, just honest. Later that afternoon, Howard asked me to wheel him out into the garden. It was early October, the air crisp and clean, the trees painted in shades of gold and amber. The kind of day Martha used to love. The kind she would have insisted we spend outside, even if it meant nothing more than sitting quietly and watching the world move around us. We settled near a row of neatly trimmed hedges. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, without warning, Howard asked, "Alan, if money weren't an issue, what would you do?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about what I wanted in a long time. Not since before Martha got sick. Not since before survival became the only thing that mattered. "I don't know," I said at first. "Take your time," he replied. So I did. I thought about it. Not quickly, not carelessly, but seriously, as if the answer mattered. Because somehow, with him, it did. I began slowly. "I think I'd like something simple." He didn't interrupt. "A small place," I continued. "Nothing fancy. Just quiet. Maybe with a garden." A faint smile touched my lips without me realizing it. Martha always said I had good hands for growing things. "And now?" he asked. "Now I think she was right," he nodded slightly. No travel, no adventure, he pressed. I shook my head. I'm not that kind of man. What kind are you? I looked out at the garden, watching the wind move through the leaves. The kind who finds peace in small things, I said. A good book, a quiet morning, a conversation with someone who actually listens. When I looked back at him, something in his expressions had changed. It wasn't pity. It wasn't amusement. It was recognition. I spent my whole life chasing bigger, he said quietly. More money, more deals, more success. He let out a dry laugh, and I never stopped to ask if it made me happy. You were successful, I said. I was rich, he corrected. There's a difference. He turned his gaze toward the horizon. I built companies, he continued, created jobs, made decisions that affected thousands of people. Then after a pause, but I didn't build relationships. The words lingered between us. I thought my children would be enough, he added, that they would fill whatever space I left empty. And did they? I asked. He didn't answer right away, but he didn't need to. We both knew. No, he said finally. Another silence, but this one felt different. Heavier, more final. Do you know what I regret most? He asked. I shook my head. I spent my life accumulating wealth, he said, and forgot to accumulate people who actually cared about me. He turned to me then, his eyes sharper than usual. Do you know how many people in this world would sit and talk to me like you do, if I didn't have money? I didn't answer, because I knew the answer was none. Margaret does her job, he continued. She's professional, efficient, loyal, in her own way. But she goes home at the end of the day. And your children? I asked gently. A faint, bitter smile crossed his face. They come when they need something. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. And you? He asked suddenly. What about me? Why do you stay? The question hit deeper than I expected. I could have given him a simple answer, a safe answer, but something about that moment, about the way he was looking at me, demanded honesty. Because you treat me like a person, I said. The words came out quieter than I intended, but they were true. I haven't felt that in a long time. He held my gaze for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. Good, he said, because I've been thinking about something. Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. This isn't about work, he added. This is about perspective. I waited. Alan, he said carefully, how long has it been since you did something just for yourself? I frowned slightly. I don't know. Think. So I did. I thought about the years before Martha got sick. Before the hospital visits. Before the bills. Before everything started to collapse. I can't remember, I admitted. Exactly, he said. He leaned back slightly in his chair. I made the same mistake, he continued. Everything I did, every decision I made, was for someone else. My children, he clarified. And now? I asked. Now, he said quietly. I'm left wondering what it was all for. The honesty in his voice was almost unsettling. This was a man who had everything, and yet he sounded just as lost as I had been. Alan, he said after a long pause. I'm not a sentimental man. I smiled faintly. I've noticed, but I'm not blind either, he added. And I know when something rare walks into my life. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I don't have much time left, he continued. The words were calm, too calm. I felt something tighten in my chest. What do you mean? My doctors have been honest with me, he said. The Parkinson's is progressing faster than expected. He looked down at his hands. They don't say it directly, he added, but I can read between the lines. I swallowed. How long? He shrugged slightly. Months, maybe less. The world seemed to slow down for a moment. Not stop, just shift. I'm sorry, I said quietly. He waved it off. Don't be, he replied. I've had a full life, more than most. He looked at me again. But that's not what I'm concerned about. What are you concerned about? My legacy, he said. The word hung heavy in the air. What happens to everything I've built, he continued. And more importantly, who deserves it? I felt a strange unease settle in my stomach. That's not really my place, I said. He smiled slightly. Maybe not, he said. But I think it might be. The wind picked up again, rustling through the trees, and for the first time, I had the distinct feeling that something far bigger than either of us had just begun. Howard didn't bring it up again for several days. Not directly, but I could feel it. Something shifting beneath the surface of our routine. His questions became more deliberate, his observations sharper, as if he were measuring something, or preparing for something he hadn't yet put into words. Then, one cold December morning, he asked me to help him into his study instead of the dining room. That alone was unusual. Breakfast had always been precise, predictable, fixed. But that day, it wasn't. The study felt different, too. He positioned his wheelchair behind the large oak desk, the same one where he used to review financial reports and sign documents with steady hands that no longer obeyed him. Sit down, Alan, he said. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something final. I sat across from him, my hands resting on my knees, waiting. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked at me. Really looked at me. The way he had during our first meeting, as if he were trying to confirm something. Then he exhaled slowly. My doctor says I have about 6 months left. The words didn't come as a shock, not entirely. I had seen the decline, the longer mornings, the trembling that no longer eased, the moments when even speaking seemed to cost him effort. But hearing it said out loud, that was different. Are you sure? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I've seen 3 specialists, he said. They all agree. My heart isn't strong enough to keep compensating. The Parkinson's is just accelerating the inevitable. Silence settled between us. Not awkward, not uncertain, just heavy. I'm sorry, I said. He nodded slightly. I know. He folded his hands together, though the tremor made the gesture imperfect. Alan, these past few months, he continued, you've been more than an employee. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure how to. You've been a friend, he said. Perhaps the only real one I've had in years. Something tightened in my chest. That's not difficult, I said quietly. You're a good man. He smiled faintly. My children would disagree. I didn't answer, because I had heard enough stories to understand. When was the last time they called? I asked instead. He let out a dry breath. "Richard called last week," he said, "supposedly to check on my health. And within 5 minutes he was asking if I'd reconsider investing in another one of his ventures." I closed my eyes briefly. "I'm sorry. David sent a Christmas card," he continued, "with a note asking if I'd adjusted my will." "And your daughter?" He shook his head. "Her lawyer contacted mine. Something about an advance on inheritance." The bitterness in his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I built everything for them," he said quietly. "Everything." He looked at me again. "And now they're waiting for me to die so they can divide it." I didn't know what to say. There are some truths too heavy for comfort, so I simply sat there and listened. "That's why I asked you about your life," he continued, "about what you would choose if you had the freedom to choose." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "Howard," I began, but he raised a hand. "Let me finish." I fell silent. "I've been thinking about my will," he said. The words landed heavily, "and I've decided to make a change." I felt my chest tighten. "That's your decision," I said carefully. "It is," he agreed, "and I want to leave you something." For a moment, I didn't understand what he meant. Then I did, and I shook my head immediately. "No," I said, "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because it's not right," I replied. "We're not family. You're already paying me." His expression didn't change. "Family," he repeated slowly. Then he leaned forward slightly. "My family hasn't treated me like family in years." The words were quiet, but absolute. "In 3 months," he continued, "you've shown me more respect, more honesty, more decency than they have in decades." "That doesn't mean—" "It means everything," he interrupted. His voice, though weakened by age, carried a force I hadn't heard before. "You didn't come here for my money," he said. "You didn't even know how much I had." "That's not the point." "It is exactly the point." We held each other's gaze. "You gave me something my children never did," he said. "You gave me dignity." The word hung in the air. "Dignity. I want to give that back to you," he added. My hands were shaking now. "Howard, please! $500,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, unable to speak. "Enough to buy that house you described," he continued. "The one with the garden." My throat tightened. "Enough to live without depending on anyone," he added. "Especially not your son." "Fred." The name didn't need to be spoken. "This is too much," I said finally. "No," he replied calmly. "It's not enough." I shook my head. "I haven't done anything to deserve this." He leaned back in his chair. "Haven't you?" His eyes didn't leave mine. "You wake up every morning and help me hold on to what little control I have left," he said. "You listen. You remember. You treat me like I still matter." He paused. "Do you know how rare that is?" I didn't answer, because I knew. "You weren't doing a job, Alan," he said quietly. "You were being a friend." The room felt smaller somehow, heavier. "And I want to say thank you," he finished. That evening his lawyer arrived, Mr. Peterson, a tall, composed man with the kind of presence that suggested he had handled far more complicated matters than this. I tried to excuse myself, But Howard stopped me. "Stay," he said. "This concerns you." I sat quietly as the documents were reviewed. "Mr. Matthews will receive $500,000, Peterson stated clearly, "to be distributed 30 days after your passing." 30 days. The words felt unreal. "There is also a provision," Peterson added, "for a temporary stipend should Mr. Matthews remain in the residence during estate proceedings." I shook my head slightly. "I won't stay," I said. "You may want to reconsider," Peterson replied. I looked at him. "Why?" "Because Mr. Whitmore's children are very likely to contest the will." The word hung in the air. Contest. "They will argue undue influence," he continued, "that you manipulated him." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "I didn't." "I know," Peterson said calmly, "and we can prove that." He glanced at Howard. "He's been thorough." I looked at Howard. He gave a faint smile. "I've had time to think," he said, "and to prepare." That night, everything changed. Howard's condition worsened suddenly. His breathing became uneven. His tremors intensified. I stayed by his side, checking on him every hour, unable to sleep. By morning, he was gone. No struggle, no final words, just silence. I was sitting beside him, reading the financial news as I always did. Mid-sentence, his breathing stopped, and that was it. I sat there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, just being, because in that moment, I had lost more than an employer. I had lost the only person who had seen me clearly in months. The funeral was small, quiet, just as he had wanted. His children arrived separately. None of them looked broken. Richard checked his phone. David adjusted his tie nervously. Susan barely looked up from her manicured nails. They didn't cry. They didn't speak to me. But they watched me, and I could see it in their eyes. Suspicion, calculation, something had already begun. After the service, Peterson approached me. "They're going to fight this," he said quietly. I nodded. I expected that. "But there's something else," he added. "What?" "They already know about you." A chill ran through me. "How?" "I'm not sure," he said. "But word travels quickly when money is involved." That evening I sat alone in the Whitmore house. The silence felt different now. Empty, not peaceful. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Dad." "Fred." I hadn't heard his voice in 4 months. "I heard about your boss," he said. "I'm sorry." His tone was wrong. Too careful, too measured. "Thank you," I replied. A pause. "Listen," he continued. "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time you came home." The words felt familiar, too familiar. "We had some disagreements," he added. "But you're still my father." Disagreements. That's what he called it. The slap, the humiliation, the theft. Disagreements. "I'm fine where I am," I said calmly. Another pause. "You don't have a job anymore," he pressed. "How are you going to support yourself?" There it was. Not concern, not love. Calculation. "How did you hear about his death?" I asked. Silence. Then, "A friend mentioned it." A lie. I knew it instantly, because the obituary hadn't been published yet, which meant one thing: someone had told him. Someone who knew. "I have to go, Fred," I said. "Dad, wait." I ended the call, and for the first time, I realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next morning, the world no longer felt private. Grief had barely settled into my bones when everything around me began to shift, faster, louder, sharper than I was ready for. Howard had only been gone a day, and already the silence of his house was being replaced by something else. Noise, questions, attention, and then pressure. At 9 o'clock, I sat across from Peterson in his office, the polished wood desk between us reflecting a version of myself I barely recognized. Tired, hollow-eyed, but no longer small. "Before we begin," Peterson said, folding his hands together, "you should know that Howard's children filed preliminary paperwork yesterday." "Yesterday?" I repeated. He nodded. "They're contesting the will." "Of course they were." "On what grounds?" "Undue influence," he replied. "They're claiming you manipulated a vulnerable man in his final months." The words felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's story. "I didn't." "I know," Peterson said calmly, "and we can prove that." He opened a thick folder, sliding several documents toward me. "Howard anticipated this," he continued. "Video testimony, medical evaluations, journal entries. He documented everything." I looked down at the papers, page after page of careful preparation. Even now, he was protecting me. "There's something else," Peterson added, pulling out a folded letter. "He asked me to give this to you if his children challenged the will." My hands trembled as I took it. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Howard's. Careful, controlled, slightly uneven. I unfolded the paper slowly. "Alan, if you're reading this, it means my children are doing exactly what I expected them to do." My throat tightened. "They are not fighting because they loved me. They are fighting because money matters more to them than the wishes of their dead father." I paused, closed my eyes, then kept reading. "Leaving you $500,000 was the easiest decision I made in my final months. You gave me dignity when my own body was betraying me. You listened when no one else did. You treated me like a human being when others treated me like an inconvenience." My vision blurred. I blinked, forcing myself to continue. "Do not let them bully you, Alan. Fight, not for the money, but for what it represents. Because kindness should not be punished, and respect should not be exploited." I lowered the letters slowly. For a moment I couldn't speak. Even in death, he was still teaching me how to stand. "What do I need to do?" I asked finally. Peterson leaned back slightly. "First, we wait," he said. "The probate process will take at least 30 days. During that time, they'll build their case." "And me?" "You prepare," he replied. "They'll investigate your life, your past, your relationship with your son." Fred. The name alone felt like a warning, as if summoned by the thought. My phone began to ring. I glanced at the screen. "Fred." I didn't answer. "Good," Peterson said. "Anything you say right now could be used against you." The phone stopped ringing, then started again and again and again. By the time I left Peterson's office, I had 5 missed calls. By evening, there were 12. By midnight, 23. I sat alone in Howard's study, staring at the phone as it lit up again. "Fred." Always Fred. The messages started out soft, careful, concerned. "Dad, please call me back. I'm worried about you. Then curious, I heard something about your boss's will. Call me so we can figure this out together. Then, calculating. If you're inheriting money, we need to talk. There are legal issues, tax implications. I let the messages play one after another, each one peeling back another layer. By the second day, there were 37 missed calls. By the third, 48. 48 times my son tried to reach me. Not when I was on my knees in his driveway. Not when I was eating his leftovers. Not when I was sleeping in a room that used to be his nursery. No, now. When there was something to gain, the last voicemail was different. The tone had changed, dropped, hardened. Dad, stop playing games, Fred's voice said. I know you're getting money. If you think you can just ignore your family now, you're delusional. A pause. Then, call me back, or I'll come find you. I stared at the phone long after the message ended, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. Just clear. The next day, I showed the messages to Peterson. He listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When the last one finished, he nodded. This helps us, he said. I blinked. How? It demonstrates motive, he explained. Your son's sudden concern coincides with financial interest. He leaned forward slightly. It strengthens our argument that Howard made the right decision. I let out a slow breath. So, I just ignore him? For now, Peterson said. Yes. The phone rang again that evening. But this time, it wasn't Fred. Mr. Matthews, a woman's voice said. This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I froze. I understand you were the caregiver for Mr. Howard Whitmore, she continued, and that you're involved in a dispute regarding his will. My grip tightened on the phone. I'd like to ask you a few questions. I handed the phone to Peterson, who had just arrived. He ended the conversation quickly. They're trying to shape the narrative, he said. Public opinion can influence legal pressure. I sat back in my chair. The walls of the study felt closer than before, smaller. Is this going to get worse? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Yes, that night I sat alone again, but this time I didn't feel lost. I felt something else. I reached for Howard's letter once more, reading it again slowly. Do not let them bully you. Fight. The words settled differently now, not as comfort, but as instruction. For most of my life, I had avoided conflict, avoided confrontation, avoided standing up for myself. I had believed that patience, kindness, endurance would be enough. But Fred had proven otherwise. And now, Howard had shown me something different. Kindness didn't mean weakness. Respect didn't mean surrender. And dignity. Dignity was something you had to defend. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror in the guest bathroom. I looked older than I remembered. Tired, worn, but not broken. Not anymore. Because somewhere between the slap and the silence, between the humiliation and the inheritance, something had changed. Not outside. Inside. For the first time in years. I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide my worth. I was ready to decide it myself. And if that meant standing in a courtroom, facing down a family that saw me as nothing more than an obstacle, then so be it. Because this time, I wasn't fighting to survive. I was fighting to remain a man. The legal battle lasted 4 months. 4 long, exhausting months, where my life, my character, my intentions, my very dignity was dissected in rooms filled with strangers who spoke in careful tones about things they did not understand. But Howard had been right. He had prepared for everything. Peterson presented video recordings, Howard sitting upright in his study, speaking clearly, explaining in his own words why he had chosen to include me in his will. There was no confusion in his voice, no hesitation, only certainty. "I am of sound mind," he said in one recording, "and I know exactly what I am doing." Medical reports confirmed it. Doctors testified that his cognitive function had remained intact until the very end. And then there were the journals, page after page, written in his careful, trembling handwriting. Accounts of missed calls, short visits, conversations that revolved not around love or concern, but around money. Evidence not of manipulation, but of neglect. Howard's children fought hard, expensive lawyers, endless arguments, accusations that I had isolated him, influenced him, somehow convinced a man of his intelligence to act against his own interests. But every claim collapsed under the weight of truth. In the end, the judge didn't take long. "The court finds no evidence of undue influence," he said. "The will is valid." Just like that, it was over. I sat in Peterson's office when he received the final confirmation. He looked up at me, a faint smile crossing his face. "You've won, Alan." The words didn't feel real at first. Won. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. A quiet, steady exhale after months of holding my breath. "There's something else," Peterson said, reaching into a drawer. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk. "Howard left this for you," he explained. "He instructed me to give it to you only after everything was settled." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was another letter and a small brass key. I unfolded the paper. "Alan, if you're reading this, it means you stood your ground. I'm proud of you." I swallowed hard. "The key is for a safety deposit box. Inside, you'll find something I wanted you to have privately. Use what I've given you wisely. Build the life you described to me. The one with the garden. You deserve peace." Howard, 2 days later I stood inside a bank vault. The air was cool, still, almost reverent. The clerk guided me to box number 247. My hands shook slightly as I inserted the key. For a moment I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside were a few documents and another envelope. I opened it slowly. A cashier's check, $50,000, and a short note for the garden. I let out a quiet breath. Even now, he was thinking of me. That afternoon, my phone rang. I knew who it was before I even looked. Fred. I answered this time. "Dad?" he said immediately. "We need to talk." His voice was tight, controlled, barely. "Hello, Fred." "Don't hello me," he snapped. "I've been trying to reach you for months." "Months?" I almost laughed. "I know," I said calmly. "Do you have any idea what people are saying?" he continued. "About you, about us." "I've heard." "Well, I don't like it," he said sharply. People think I neglected you." There it was. Not guilt, not regret. Reputation. "Did you?" I asked quietly. Silence. "Then things got complicated after Mom died," he said. "We were both grieving." "You slapped me, Fred." Another silence. "I don't remember it that way." "I do." His tone hardened. "So what? You're just going to cut me off?" I felt something steady settle inside me. Not anger, not pain. Clarity. "No," I said. "I'm not cutting you off." A pause. "Then what are you doing?" "I'm choosing myself." The words came easily, naturally, as if they had been waiting a long time to be spoken. "You're my father," he said. "I'm your family." "Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me." "That old man wasn't your family," Fred snapped. "I am." I took a breath, slow, measured. "Howard Whitmore showed me more respect in 4 months than you showed me in 40 years. The line went quiet. "You can't replace your own son," he said finally. "I didn't," I replied. "You replaced yourself." His breathing grew heavier. "You'll regret this," he said. "When you're alone. When you need help." "I won't," I said calmly, "because I've learned something." "What?" "The difference between being alone and being lonely." I paused. "I was lonelier in your house than I've ever been by myself." He didn't respond. "Not right away." "Then you're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said, "but it's mine to make." And then he hung up. No goodbye, no apology, just silence. But this time, it didn't hurt. The next morning, I stood in front of my new home. A small cottage on the outskirts of town. Nothing grand, nothing impressive, but it was mine. The garden was overgrown when I first saw it. Neglected, forgotten, much like I had been. But I saw potential. I always had. 3 weeks later, I was on my knees in the soil, planting tomatoes and peppers, my hands covered in dirt, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. For a brief moment, my chest tightened. But when I looked up, it wasn't Fred. It was Mrs. Henderson. "Alan!" she called, smiling as she stepped out of the car. I stood up, brushing my hands on my pants. "Elizabeth, what a surprise!" She looked around, taking in the house, the garden, the quiet. "This is perfect," she said softly. "Martha would have loved it." I nodded. She would have. We sat on the porch that afternoon, drinking coffee and talking the way she and Martha used to, about small things, simple things, the kind that matter more than we realize. "He moved," she said gently at one point. "Fred?" She nodded. "Sold the house, left the state. I heard. He wasn't doing so well financially." I absorbed that quietly. There was a time when that would have brought me satisfaction. Now, it just felt distant. "Do you miss him?" she asked. I thought about it. Really thought. "I miss the boy he used to be," I said finally, "but not the man he became." She squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing." That evening I sat alone in my living room, a book in my hands, the window open, letting in the soft sounds of wind moving through the trees. The house was quiet, but not empty. Peaceful. For the first time in a long time. Peaceful. Months passed. The garden grew. Tomatoes ripened under the sun. Peppers lined up in neat rows. Flowers bloomed where there had once been only neglect. And slowly, so did I. I joined a local gardening group, met people, talked, laughed, lived. One morning, as I watered the plants, a young man approached the gate. "Are you Alan Matthews?" he asked. "I am. I'm a social worker," he said. "I work with elderly clients dealing with family issues." He hesitated. "I've been following your story." I set the watering can down. "And?" "I was wondering if you might talk to some of them." I studied him for a moment. "What would I say?" He smiled gently. "The truth." So I did. Weeks later, I sat across from an elderly woman whose daughter had been taking her money. Then a man whose son was trying to force him out of his home. And I told them what I had learned. That love should not come with conditions. That respect is not something you earn through suffering. That family is not defined by blood, but by choice, by kindness, by dignity. On the first anniversary of Howard's death, I visited his grave. I placed a small bundle of vegetables from my garden on the stone. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for everything." The wind moved softly through the trees, and for a moment I felt something close to peace settle over me. As I walked back to my car, I thought about everything that had happened. The loss, the humiliation, the betrayal, and the unexpected gift that had followed. Not just money, but something far more valuable. The understanding that I was worth more than I had allowed myself to believe, that I deserved better, that it was never too late to start again. I drove home to my small cottage, to my garden, to my quiet life, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and orange, I realized something. At 67 years old, I was finally free.